welcome to Ottawa Experts. I'm your host, Barbara Balfour. Does the thought of speaking in public make you clam up in fear? If you feel you have a great story to tell, but you'd rather be eaten alive by alligators than actually tell it to people in public, well, keep watching. This is the show for you. As researcher storyteller Brene Brown once said, the greatest challenge we will ever face in life is to learn how to tell our story while loving ourselves in the process. And this could not be more true than for our next guest, who I am so delighted to introduce tonight. Most people know Frank O'Day as the co-founder of Second Cup coffee chain, but many of you might not know that Frank used to be homeless, and in his teens he was already an alcoholic. Today, Frank is a renowned humanitarian whose work has launched multiple charities across the globe. For his work, he was named Officer of the Order of Canada. As a speaker, he is much in demand, and understandably so, at conferences and fundraisers across North America. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Frank.
Barbara, it's a great pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Next, I'm so excited to introduce to you Terry Leposki. He helps people become winning TEDx speakers, among many other things. He is also the founder of Ubiquity, which is an executive coaching and presentation coaching firm. Terry helps people shine on stage and at work, guiding them to prepare and deliver professional and polished presentations. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Barbara.
Now, as always, we welcome your feedback and your questions for our guests. Please join the conversation by calling 613-728-1001. We welcome your questions. Frank, I'd like to start with you. Maybe you could take us back into some of the circumstances in your early childhood that led you to being on the streets at such a young age.
Well, Barbara, it's not a pleasant story. At 13, we lived north of Montreal. We had a cottage north of Montreal, and we'd go there for the summer. And at that cottage, I was sexually abused by an older person there, and as a result of that, began a very serious downward spiral. Drinking was the focus of that, and I caused nothing but damage and difficulty for my family, and it was a significant problem, and by the time I was 18 I was in serious difficulty, and by the time I was 21 my dad sat me down in the den of our home and said, Frank, for the good of the family, you've got to go. You have to leave today. You're destroying the family. Your mother's tired of clearing up your bounce checks on Westminster Avenue. Your brothers and sister don't want to bring their friends home anymore because they don't know what shape you're in, and I'm tired of the wrecked cars and the courts and the costs and the lawyers, and it's time for you to go.
Had you ever told him what happened to you?
I did, and in those days it was poo-pooed and swept under the rug, and it was in that case too. So it was ignored. And that day I got in my car and I drove out, and I left Montreal and went to Toronto, and got a little job, and before long lost that job, and then I was on Skid Row for a period of time in the Toronto area.
So when you co-founded Second Cup, you're about 30 years of age.
29, actually.
29,
yep.
And that's young for someone who even had an idyllic childhood. How did you get to that point?
Well, first I had to sober up. Really kind of an interesting story. I was 26 years old. I was on the road, living in a flop house. Everything I owned was on my back. And one of the jobs I'd had before I lost it was a paint salesman. And I was selling paint around the southwestern Ontario, and I ran into a guy who owned a store at the corner of College and Spadina. The name of the store is, suddenly I'm forgetting, Exclusive Paints. And the guy who owns the store was Izzy Rangowitz. And Izzy saved my life. Now, he didn't know it, nor did I at the time, but he saved my life. He had this little store, and he called it Exclusive Paints. The only thing exclusive, Barbara, about it was a sign. I mean, it was just a hole in the wall. But he said to me, he said, Frank, if you show up for work, I'll pay you $5. Now, if you stay for an hour, if you stay for a day, you'll only get $5, because for $5 you can't hurt yourself too badly.
He must have taken a liking to you.
Oh, we knew each other from the sales. So he did. He really liked me, and he said, if you stay through lunch, I'll buy you lunch. Well, Exclusive Paints is still there. The bagel, which is where they bought the lunch, was still there. And I would show up if I was really sick, or if I was really cold, or if I just couldn't panhandle anymore. I would go to work, and I would get $5. But Izzy had a radio that played in the store, and I think it was broken. It only played one station. And in 1971, there were commercials for alcoholism. Now, I don't remember what the commercial said, but the tagline said, if you're having problems with alcohol, call us, we're in the book. Call us, we're in the book. And as I took paint cans up out of the cellar and put them on the shelf, which was my job, and I'm sure somebody had to fix them, but I kept hearing call us, we're in the book, and it would stick in my mind, but it meant nothing to me.
You didn't know you had a problem.
Oh, I knew I had a problem, but I wasn't ready to deal with it. Months later, I'm standing at the corner of Shooter and Jarvis, having come out of the flop house, waiting to do what we'd done every day for a long time. Two other guys and I worked the street, panhandled, getting up for a bottle of wine. When I got to the point in my life where I couldn't go any further. I don't mean I couldn't drink anymore. I could get arrested again. I could. But what I couldn't do any further is I couldn't keep trading off my soul. It seemed I'd trade off every value that I'd learned as a kid. And I just couldn't go any further. And it seemed I had two choices, very clear: die or change. Suicide at 26 years old, it's constant in my mind. Die or change. Call us, we're in the book. Call us, we're in the book. So I walked to King and Yonge Street, and I stuck out my hand. Hundreds of people, as you know, a very busy corner, right on 8 o'clock in the morning, thousands of people.
None of them know what's going through your mind at that moment.
No, everything I know on my back, I'm dirty, and I stick out my hand out of a crowd of people. One guy comes by and drops a dime in my hand, and in those days a phone call was a dime. And I took that
dime.
Wait till the end of the story, Barbara. So I took that dime and I made a phone call, and I never had another drink. Now the point of the story is, that guy has no idea what he did for me. He changed my life. He changed the lives of all the people I came in touch with afterwards, all because he reached in his pocket, he gave a dime. Now, lots of people give me money before that and I drank it, but in this case, it was the right time at the right moment, and it changed my life forever. Never had another drink. It's a very powerful message to all of us that we don't know what it is we're doing, but we should keep doing it. Doing it for others changes people's lives.
I have goosebumps right now, Frank. And Terry, I want to hear more about what brought you to this line of work, but first we have a caller. Emma, are you on the line?
Yes, hi.
Hi, thanks so much for watching. Did you have a question?
It's for Frank. So what gave you the strength to keep going?
What gave me the strength to keep going? Drinking or stopping drinking? All right. So what gave me the strength to keep going? I was really going downhill rapidly. I was drinking, I got thrown out of home, I lost the jobs, I went from a rooming house to a flop house, and between those two I left everything I owned at Union Station, figuring I'd pick it up, and I never did, of course. So everything I had was on my back. And to get through the day was just to get to Yonge Street, panhandle for 99 cents, get a bottle of wine, we'd sit in the alleyway beside the flop house and tell stories, all of them lies, and think about tomorrow, and tomorrow I'm going to quit, tomorrow I'm going to get a job, tomorrow I'm going to call my family, and tomorrow never came, and you drink. And it was just getting through that. And as I say, I got to that point where I couldn't go any further, and then my life turned. And then what kept me strong? For the first 6 months, I was completely unemployable. I mean, the synapses weren't working. I was living in the Salvation Army. My first Christmas, I sobered up 2 days before Christmas. So my first Christmas was at the Fred Victor in Toronto, and maybe 450 people having Christmas dinner, everybody all alone, just over our little, it was just so sad, right? But then I joined a self-help group, which has to remain anonymous because I'm not allowed to say Alcoholics Anonymous. So I joined the self-help group, and they took me under their arm, and they helped me along for the first 6 months. My first sponsor, that night when I first went to a meeting, he gave me a handful of dimes, about $1.50. And he said, tomorrow you can either drink this or make a call. And the next day I got up and I made the calls, and before long I didn't have enough for a bottle of wine. And I went to meetings, and I just kept going. Because what gave me the courage? I wrote a book called When All You Have Is Hope, because hope was the very beginning of everything. Hope is everything. Without hope, I go nowhere. But with hope, I can get up in the morning, I can start doing things, I can have a vision for myself, for my family, for my community. Hope, vision, action. 3 words that are absolutely key. When I think about my life, hope, vision, action. Hope first, vision for myself, take the action. A vision without action, simply a dream. So hope, vision, action took me from Skid Row to the Order of Canada.
Powerful message, very powerful message. Terry, tell me about how you got into this line of work. I imagine it must be extremely rewarding to be able to work with people like Frank who have these kinds of stories, who develop the courage to tell them publicly.
Well, I don't think that I need to explain too much. It's so compelling to hear stories like this. And the people that I've worked with in the past, back in the 90s, I used to do, I took a Dale Carnegie course. I wanted to better myself and get ahead in my career. So I took a Dale Carnegie course. Of course, there's a big emphasis on public speaking. But what I found was I was helping a lot of the other people within that group. And I got wrapped into their stories. I find that there are so many people out there with amazing stories to tell. And before I knew it, they asked me to start leading one of the courses for Dale Carnegie and mentoring some of the other students. And that just kept snowballing. Now, fast forward quite a few years later, I'm out here in Ottawa, and the TEDx scene was just starting up. They asked me if I wanted to get involved or if I knew anybody that would help. I looked around, tried to find some coaches that would help, and I couldn't. They came back and asked me again, why don't you do it, Terry? I know you've got the background in it.
Why didn't you want to?
Well, I felt at the time I was working as an executive coach. So I was helping people within corporations better themselves, get a little bit ahead, navigate through challenges and opportunities. But this whole idea of helping people with the public speaking, so I said to them, look, I'm not up to polish on this. I haven't done this in years. But I went back to the starting board and I started studying it again and learning it again. And pretty soon I was getting up on stage and I was helping other people. And when I hear stories like this is why I do it. The amazing stories that we have, they're way better than anything that Hollywood could ever dream up. I mean, coming from, as he said, Skid Row to the Order of Canada, it does not get any better.
Yeah, and when we come back from the break, we're just about to go to break, but when we come back, I want to hear more about how to put together a winning TEDx application. Of course, tips for people who are starting out on public speaking and storytelling. So don't go away. We'll be right back after the break. Welcome back to Ottawa Experts. I'm your host, Barbara Balfour. We're learning the secrets of public speaking and storytelling tonight with very special guests, Frank O'Day and Terry Lepofsky. Now, before we went to break, we were talking a little bit about what drives you to do what you do as a coach. Terry, can you sort of say in your own words, why is public speaking important?
Public speaking, I think, gets a bad rap. If you were to ask 1,000 people out there what their biggest fear is, the most common thing that's going to come up is public speaking. The Book of Lists actually puts this at the very top of human fears, really? Ahead of death. So I heard Jerry Seinfeld, the famous comedian, talk about this, and he joked around by saying that if you have to go to a funeral, most people would rather be in the box than delivering the eulogy. And that's funny, but in fact, it's actually kind of sad, because I think public speaking is really a fundamental thing that connects all of us. And I think really from our earliest days and before even recorded time, this is what's brought people together and built tribes and communities. And when people can relate a great story to somebody else, it really does bring those people together. So that's what I like to do, is to try to help people find the steps that will help them put it together.
Now we have a caller on the line. Laura, are you with us?
I am.
Thank you so much for watching. Did you have a question for our guests?
I do. Do you talk to people about how to alleviate their fears? Like they talk about imagining everybody in their underwear in the audience?
Does that actually work?
I don't know. I'm still scared.
I think you and I both together would say the same thing about that, wouldn't we?
Right.
Not at all.
Not at all.
Doesn't for me anyway.
Now, the key, I think, I don't know, Terry, and when I listen to you, I mean, it comes through in this. I mean, if you're authentic, I mean, if you're just authentic about what you're doing and what you're saying, it becomes much more simple. I'm not trying to impress, I'm just trying to authentically tell my story.
Right.
And if I can do that, then the audience senses it, I believe, and at least it's been my experience. And when I listen to you and and speaking to Barbara, you're authentic about what you're saying. So that's captivating. And when before I ever get up, every time, I just say a small little prayer that let me be authentic. If I'm speaking from my head rather than my heart, the speech is the same words, but it doesn't work. Right. If I'm speaking from my heart, there's not a movement in the audience.
Wow.
Wow.
That's good. That's very powerful.
Yes, yes.
Do you get nervous?
I always get nervous because I have an obligation to try and be the best I can and to deliver something the audience would want. So I get nervous. But once I get up, I once had one call with one coach in Florida one time.
Right.
And he gave me one piece of advice that he probably gave me a lot more, but the one that I remember is he says, don't say thank you everybody for being here, don't thank the audience, just get up and start. And so I always start with the following. When I was a young man, I was on Skid Row. Mm-hmm. And that just gets everybody's attention.
Yep.
And then and a priest friend, Sean O'Sullivan, who was an MP and then became a priest, also gave me another piece of advice. Always start strong, end strong, and the in-between doesn't matter.
Thank you so much for joining us, Laura. Now, as the coach, Terry, you know that part of this is easier said than done. What are some tangible tricks and techniques you give to your clients who are just starting out to kind of alleviate some of that anxiety?
Yeah, there are lots of different techniques, and I've tried to gather as many as I can as a collection because I find that something different works for every different person out there. Now, I think the two biggest things that really get people, one is that feeling of the butterflies in the stomach.
And I get that every time before every show. That means that I still care, right?
Right, and to his point, you're being authentic by mentioning that. And I think that you need to do that in order to deal with whatever it is. The ego can get in the way, and if you come out strong saying, no, I don't get nervous, well then you're going to be, dealing with things in a very backhanded way. But the butterflies in the stomach is very easy to deal with. And the way to do that is it's simply a matter of reinterpreting what you're feeling. So instead of feeling, I'm nervous, instead say to yourself, I'm excited. Because the feeling is exactly the same thing. It is adrenaline in both circumstances. Fear and excitement are both based on adrenaline. And when you feel those butterflies in the stomach, you tell yourself you're excited for what you're about to do. It's going to change everything.
Basically, that means you're focusing on a positive outcome rather than a negative outcome.
Well, here's another way of saying it. If you're driving down a long highway and you're staring at the ditch, where are you going to go? Into the ditch, right? So stare right down the highway. Tell yourself you're excited, come out and deliver a gift for people. That's one way to deal with it. The second thing that really happens to people is that they get 1,000 conversations going on in their mind. And they've got all of these things in their mind and they can't get clarity and focus. And if you look at any professional athlete or anybody who needs to present and be on the spot at a certain time and deliver high performance, they need clarity and focus. So sit before you go up on stage, sit before you go in front of your team at work, or before you have to deliver a talk to your local coffee crowd or whatever it is at the second cup. And before you get up there, just sit quietly, breathe a little bit, close your eyes, and just focus on your breath. If you keep your attention on your breath, all of those thoughts will start to settle like sediment in a glass. So that's the way to deal with that one.
We have a caller on the line. Helen, are you with us?
Yes, here I am.
Thanks so much for watching. Did you have a question?
Yes, my question is for Frank. First off, I just wanted to tell you thank you so much for your vulnerability and just sharing your story. It's really impactful. And I can really resonate with what you said, because I come also from a similar background of homelessness, addiction, and overcoming all of that as well as abuse. So my question specifically is, being in business myself now, what do you recommend as one of the top things that someone should focus on, getting started in business now?
Top thing is always, for me anyway, and you may be different, but the most important thing for me to do is have passion about what I'm doing.
Right.
I do have to believe in what we're doing and have passion in doing it, and that overcomes virtually everything. And it can take a very long time to be successful, but that doesn't mean you need to lose your passion. Yes, there's lots of ups and there's lots of downs. For me, I always work with a partner, because when I'm down, he or she can be up, or vice versa. But because building a business is the hardest thing I've ever done. There's no doubt in my mind that's the hardest thing. But and I keep doing startups, whether they're not for profit or for profit. I keep doing them. I seem to fall into them. I do them well, but they're the hardest thing I've ever done, and sometimes takes a great deal of time. So just be patient, be focused, and be passionate about what you're doing. And when the difficulties happen, let me just tell you a very quick story, if I may, Barbara, in this process. But we were building the second cup. We were up to 6 stores. They were all company owned. We started the whole thing with $1,000, so we were always undercapitalized, always struggling. How do you pay your bills, and so on. We're offered a 7th store in Eaton Centre, Toronto. Big shopping center, very successful shopping center. In fact, we were already in phase 1. We were doing so well in phase 1, they offered us in phase 2. We didn't have the money, so we went to the bank to see if we could borrow some money. And we put our business plan before the banker, and the banker looked it over carefully, and with great perception, he said, with 6 stores, you've saturated the market for coffee stores in North America. So we're not going to give you money for the 7th store. There's certainly no room for that in Toronto. So he turned us down. Now, think about that. We're 29 years old. We both had no business experience. Here's a very senior business guy telling us that our idea doesn't work, that we can't be successful, and that it's over.
Did
what
you
do you
believe
do?
him?
So Tom and I did the only thing that makes sense. We went and had a cup of coffee. And over coffee, we looked at our store and we saw there were people repeating their orders. They were coming back. They were customers. We had a business. We didn't have enough going over the dam, but we had a business. So we needed to find financing. So we went and told our story. Now, we told our story to other bankers, and some of them said no as well. But we just kept telling the story until we found a banker whose name was Bruce McKenzie, by the way, from Calgary, who said, I love your idea, and financed the story. Tell your story. There are going to be lots of naysayers. There's going to be lots of people who say it can't be done. Keep telling your story. Tell your story until just when you get tired of telling your story, people begin to hear the story. So just keep being passionate, being focused. So Helen, good luck with your project, whatever it is. And look, sometimes they do fail. Yeah, sure they do. I've had some failures too. We can talk about air ambulances if you like, but you just need to know that if you have customers and you have enough going over the dam, you're going to be successful. Yeah, it just takes time. I've been working on a project for years in Brazil. It takes time. Startups are difficult, but you know, if I may, just quickly back to your point.
Yeah.
When you're getting up to speak and you get all those butterflies and all that, I agree with that. But there's also something else. You don't have to fill all the air. It's okay to pause and to think.
Oh, absolutely.
Oftentimes speakers say, I just sort of ran out of words. Well, no. It's okay just to stop.
Yeah.
Let a little space go by and then continue your thought, or allow your brain to catch up to where your mouth is going. Or in my case, sometimes my mouth gets ahead of my brain, so sometimes I just have to stop for a moment. Pause.
Thank you so much for calling in, Helen. Terry, I want to ask you a question. Do you sometimes find yourself playing therapist to your clients? Because I imagine so many emotions come out of the woodwork, maybe even some repressed memories, things that they never really wanted to deal with that all of a sudden arise to the surface.
Yeah, I think at times you've got to be very careful, and you also have to remind people about what it is that they're bringing to the table. Because quite often when people are wanting to get up and share their story with somebody, there's something significant that's happened in their life, like with Frank. And so sometimes you need to help people by reminding them to breathe and to pause, as he said. And by the way, I'll add that pausing in public speaking, I consider that a real secret weapon.
It's a powerful thing.
The eyes and the pausing are two things that will really turn a presentation into something really dynamic and really polished.
Any other secrets?
I would say working a lot with getting off of a script. As soon as you can get off of a script, and start speaking to somebody like they're just friends over in your living room and it's your turn to talk, that's one of the big secrets as well.
It's probably really intimidating for most people.
I never use notes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Never. Yeah, it's just
For you.
I cannot speak from notes. I get distracted. I try to read them, and it's dumb. So I just throw them away and don't do it.
You know what? That's a good problem to have. We're just about to go to break, but when we come back, I want to hear more of some of your tips and tricks and how you can learn to become a master storyteller like Frank O'Day. Don't go away. We'll be right back after the break with lots more. Welcome back to Ottawa Experts. I'm your host, Barbara Balfour. Tonight we're talking about the secrets of storytelling and public speaking with master storyteller and co-founder of the Second Cup chain, Frank O'Day, and TEDx and executive presentation coach, Terry Leposki. We were talking during the break about imposter syndrome and whether you ever come across that either yourself, Frank, or with your clients. Terry, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, everybody has that, I think, but certainly, that thing, if they really knew me, they wouldn't like me. But you realize quickly, as Terry was saying in the break, that everybody around the table is feeling the same way at some point or other, so you get over that pretty quickly. But it's not unusual to have it. It's just that nobody's perfect, and we all have our warts and we all have our difficulties, and everybody at the table does too. I often remember advice I had from a coach one time who said, when you're speaking to an audience and everybody's with you except one guy in the corner who is obviously not paying attention or scowling or somehow sending messages that he's disbelieving or whatever. So instead of focusing on that person, which we tend to do, everybody's got to love me. So if this guy, so I just ignore him. Let him do whatever he's going to do, but speak to your audience. Your audience is with you, and I don't know, Terry, but it seems to me that they want you to succeed. They want you to be good.
They're rooting
so
for
they're rooting for you at some level. And if you got some guy in the back scowling, just turn your head. Pretend he isn't there. At least that's been what I've done. You can't please everybody, but your job is, as a speaker, to have a message for your audience that resonates with the audience. And I can tell whether it's resonating or not because people are paying attention. If I've got a bunch of people getting up and going to the washroom or getting a coffee or I'm not doing very well. I better change my cadence. But that doesn't happen. But you can't be focused on the one person or two in the room that aren't paying attention.
I want to hear your thoughts on this too, Terry, but we have a caller on the line. Shannon, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Thanks so much for joining us. Did you have a question?
Actually, I have a question exactly about what you're talking about right now. I do a lot of presentations for work, and I'm wondering basically how you deal with disruptive people in your audience. What kinds of tips and tricks would you have for dealing with them other than, I guess, just flat out trying to ignore them?
Terry, I imagine some of your clients might have presentations to give in front of audiences they're not that receptive or that friendly.
Could be.
Yeah, and I think probably the best advice that I've ever heard comes from many, many miles away. I saw an interview once with the Dalai Lama. And they asked him, they said, look, you're meeting world leaders every day. This guy's on the road, he's doing 50, 60 meetings with world leaders a year. Pretty significant. And the answer that came from him really surprised me. He said, he laughed in his customary way, and he says, I do the best that I can do, and I leave the rest to fate. And I think that that's really good advice, Absolutely. Is control what you can control, and don't worry about the rest. Let it pan out. Unless it's really disruptive, in which case, hopefully you've got a good team around you that can help out with that situation. But I think expecting that everybody around us is really going to love what we're doing is really not a realistic thing to do. Again, if you're focused on the ditch as you're driving, you're going to end up in the ditch. So focus on the people that are really connecting with what you're talking about, those ones who are engaged, and try to deliver a gift for those people.
So realistically, what can you control? I mean, other than planting your biggest fans in the audience, what are some techniques you might have for your clients?
Hey, speak in a really compelling way. Start off in a way that's going to grab people's attention. Like Frank said, jump straight into a story, or ask a question to the audience, or come out with a bold statement. Those are 3 key ways to get people's attention within about 3 seconds. Everybody's got their phones put away. They are now leaning forward at 10%. They're listening. They're not going to be chatting to the person next to them. That's what you want to do, is get people's attention early, and then you can start into the message that you really want to get across. So there's 3 main parts. There's opening. I call it opening with a bang. Then there's telling your story or getting your message across, or a combination of those 2 things. And then there's an end. So there's a beginning, middle, and an end. And in the end, you want to deliver a gift to everybody there, either advice or a challenge. You want to challenge everybody there, or you want to offer them a new perspective, something like that that will give them something, because reciprocity is universal. No matter where you go in the world, into the deepest forests or the biggest cities, reciprocity is very important. If they're going to give you their time and attention, they want something back.
They want value.
So give them value before you're done. Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us, Shannon. Frank, I wanted to ask you, of course, I forgot the question that I wanted to ask you. See, I'm being authentic.
I was thinking what Terry said. I always end with an uplifting sort of message, right at the end. You start with a bang. At the end, I always end up with and I use the same. The other thing that I was taught very early by a politician was, if a joke works well with an audience, keep telling the joke. Because those who have heard it before will laugh anyway. The others are brand new, and it always works. So keep telling the same joke. And I've been telling the same jokes for 15 years. Audience still laughs. It still works. So what works, use. What doesn't, discard. Keep moving on.
I remembered what I wanted to ask you. How did you build your self-esteem to the point where you felt that you had a story worth telling and that people would listen? That's
an interesting question, Barry. I started doing some talks, and I did a lot of pro bono talks, and to just get comfortable. So I would do talks for small groups, and whenever I was sort of asked, once I had done the second cup, people started to ask me to speak, so I would do that.
Do you remember the first speech you ever gave?
No, I don't really, but I did a lot of the really pro bono, and then I started to charge a little bit, and then I kept ratcheting it up until people said ouch. So you tend to find that level, and my brother, who works with me, books all of my speaking and all of that. So now I've got to the point where he negotiates all those prices. I don't have to, which is a very nice relief.
It's a great offer.
Yeah, it's worked, and I don't do as many as I used to. At the peak, I did 40 a year, and that, and they're usually compressed into fall and spring. So that's a lot of speeches, sometimes 3 a day. I don't do that many anymore, but it starts with getting out and practicing. There's nothing like practice. You practice. I said earlier I don't use notes. Well, that's because I've done a lot of them, and now I'm comfortable with what it is I want to say. Now, no story is the same. No speech is the same. The audiences are different, so you have to speak differently to different audiences. I always spend 15 or 20 minutes with the organizers and people in the conference that I'm speaking at to get a sense of what the mood is and what the issues are, and then I just build it into my speech so that I'm speaking to them and they know that it's specific to them. But it's only 15 or 20 minutes before. I don't spend hours of research. I just get there and I understand what it is that's going on in that room and then speak to those issues, while at the same time telling my story. So my story is pretty much practiced because I've done a lot of it, but putting in the pieces makes it personal.
We have a caller on the line. Welcome to the show. Did you have a question?
Hi, yes.
Hi.
Hi. I'm at a time in my life where I'm going through a lot of change, like a separation, needing to look for a job for the first time in 25 years, although I've been self-employed. And I'm finding it really hard when I'm talking to potential employers or somebody, where to draw the line between too much information about telling my story and why I'm kind of going through this big life change. So how do you determine where to draw the line in that kind of situation?
Terry, what do you think?
Probably the best thing that you can do in that situation is find a trusted friend. Try it out with them. Write it out and start thinking about how you're going to structure it, how you can sort of introduce the ideas that you're going to put forward, then get into those ideas, and then wrap it up with a conclusion. Do that so that you don't end up going down a branch too long. But I'd say practice is really, really important. Frank hit it right on the head. Practice is something that I think not enough people put emphasis on. And I think it was the Mark Twain who once said that a good impromptu speech takes about 3 weeks to prepare.
So true.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you have to practice. And to your question, Terry's exactly right. If you know where you want to end that conversation when you start, you're likely to end there. Otherwise, you'll just sort of find yourself
just ramble
and then sort of lose it. So the audience is one, the interviewer or two, and you can see if their eyes are glazing. You can see if they're interested. You just sort of end it, but always know where you're going to end. So you can shorten, I think, Terry, that whole presentation, but always get to your end. So you know what you want to say at the end to leave your audience, in this case one or two, with a very clear vision of what it is you wanted to say.
Yeah, let me just back up a second here. When I said write it down, we always want to try to get the ideas out of our mind and onto paper to synthesize our thinking. Because oftentimes when you start doing that, you're going to end up with things scribbled out, arrows going all over the place, and realizing that some of the examples that you wanted to bring out, some of the stories you wanted to tell, some of the points you want to make are better arranged in a different way because they make more logical sense once you write it down. Once you're happy with what's written down, take that piece of paper, crumple it up, and throw it in the garbage. Take out a couple of Post-it notes and just write down your main ideas. Once you have those main ideas down, just speak from your heart and from your own experience, and it will come out more conversationally than scripted. And that's really important as well.
Absolutely. It's back to the authenticity thing.
It is, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for calling in tonight. Frank, are you an introvert or an extrovert?
Not sure. You sort of posed that before we started this, and I sort of been letting it ramble around. I don't know. I think in some cases, in some cases I'm an extrovert. Other times I'm not. I think I'm sort of ambidextrous. There's times when, it's a little like getting sick at home. If I'm really sick, I want lots and lots and lots of attention, but leave me alone.
Yeah. Does it matter for your clients, Terry, who are trying to master public speaking?
I think there's an element of pushing yourself out of your comfort zone a little bit more for the introverts. They tend to get more energy from withdrawing from a crowd and then thinking about what they're going to do or a problem that they need to solve. So I think for an extrovert, they're more comfortable being in front of a crowd and thinking on their feet that way. They gain more energy from that space. So from that perspective, yeah, it's pushing out of the comfort zone a little bit, but I think going through the steps that I would normally take people through, that really overcomes a lot of that and gets them into that zone.
Even Johnny Carson who was the king of late night TV. He was famous for being painfully shy and for being an introvert.
And Barack Obama and Oprah Winfrey.
We're just about to go to break, but I want to hear more about some of the things, some of the events that are coming up and some of the exciting projects that you're involved in. So don't go away. We'll be right back after the break. Hi, welcome back to Ottawa Experts. I'm your host, Barbara Balfour. We are in the studio with master storyteller and co-founder of the Second Cup coffee chain, Frank O'Day, and TEDx and executive presentation coach, Terry Leposki. Now, Terry, TEDx season is coming up, and for those of our viewers who may be wondering what TEDx is, and for those of us who already know what it is and want to put together a winning application, can you fill us in on some of the do's and don'ts?
Yeah. The TEDx application season is definitely upon us. As a matter of fact, it's we've got auditions coming up on the 30th of May at Algonquin College. I think probably some of the things, if anybody out there is thinking about putting in an application and they'd love to get up on that stage at TEDx, one of the big things is to have one key message, something unique. And every year the TEDx's will have a theme like solving for X or change or something like that. So taking a look at that theme, and if you've got a message that really fits within that theme, that's a great opportunity to rush forward and get the application in. So one key idea, and then have those 3 segments that I talked about earlier, a really great way to start with a bang. And then some compelling stories to illustrate what it is you want to talk about, and then wrapping it up in a way that's going to give a gift to the audience.
It sounds like being a good writer is essential.
I wouldn't say that it's essential. I think being able to speak your story is probably more important than being able to write it. It's important to get your ideas in a good logical fashion, but probably storytelling is more important. It was Warren Buffett who said just a few months ago in an interview, he said the best leaders are storytellers, master storytellers. This is one of the most wealthy people in the world. His whole life is about investment, financial investment, and he's really big on storytelling.
We have a caller on the line. Emily, are you with us?
Yes, hi.
Hi, did you have a question for our guests?
Yeah, so I am not someone who ever has to do any kind of public speaking or any speaking engagements for work, but I know that it's something I need to improve on, even in smaller group settings. For instance, just speaking in front of my hockey team sometimes, if I have to make an announcement, I often get really nervous. So do you have tips for kind of the average person for speaking in front of groups?
Yeah, you know what? That's a great question. Number one thing that I would say is do not drink any coffee before you go up to present. Avoid it, even if it gives you a headache.
Really?
Avoid the coffee because it will really amplify those jitters. The second thing, and this is something that I wanted to mention before, I think if you watch Frank speak and talk about his history and his story, you'll notice something very, very key, and that is confidence. Now, I'm going to just talk real briefly about a little trick that people can use to give them confidence, and that is this area right down here. If you breathe from this region right down here and maintain your breathing in your diaphragm region rather than up here in the throat, then you're going to come through with a lot more confidence. So if I breathe from a lower point down here, my voice starts to sound like it's got more bass to it and it's got a greater ground to it. If I start to speak from my throat up here and I'm breathing more shallow and my in-breaths are very, very quick, then my voice sounds like it's got more excitement to it and it's at a higher pitch. So you can deliver a message by using both of those, but if you want more confidence, try breathing from a little deeper down like this and you will get that rich tone that really expresses that feeling of confidence.
Thanks
That's
for
really
calling
neat.
in, Emily.
That's really neat. I didn't know that.
Yeah, you do it naturally.
Oh, yeah.
Did you have something to add to that, Frank?
I did, but I forget what it was. No, I've forgotten. I did have something that was really poignant, but gone.
It'll come back. It'll come back.
Absolutely.
What are some of the stories that everybody wants to hear nowadays when it comes to crafting a story that will really resonate with contemporary audiences? What are some of the big stories right now?
I'm gonna steal a page off of a good friend of mine, another coach in the city of Ottawa, Ed Belat. And Ed Belat is an expert when it comes to storytelling. And he taught this to me. And the storytelling method that he teaches is so simple. STAR, STAR. The STAR storytelling method. It starts off with S, which stands for situation, right? So who are we talking about? Where are they? Set the stage for it, right? You said you were on the streets of Toronto. That's the situation. Trouble is what the T stands for, right? So you got kicked out of your father's home, then you had to deal with that. You were in and out of the jobs, panhandling. So there's the trouble. The A stands for action. This would be like, Rocky Balboa retreating to the log cabin in the backcountry to find himself, or the guys from Star Wars going off to learn more about the Force and how to use that. Or our friend Frank over here who got that dime and that changed his life. So it's that action that turns things around, and then the R stands for result. So situation, trouble, action, result. That is a brilliant method for storytelling.
It feels like stories are as essential to our well-being as school books and vitamins, that they can really help us develop empathy, rooting for the protagonist, maybe even bring about things like solving conflict resolution. What have been some of the impacts of sharing your story that you've seen in other people, Frank?
Well, let me just tell you sort of an interesting little vignette of, I was giving a speech at the Four Seasons in Toronto. Now, that's really upscale, right? It's an upscale hotel, 5-star, lovely dinner, good audience, very leaders in their communities and so on. And I was staying at the Intercontinental, which is along Bloor Street. So I was walking along Bloor. It was a beautiful summer night, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, feeling pretty good about the speech, just generally feeling pretty good about myself as I'm walking along, looking at all the wonderful stores, and they're all closed, of course. And then I crossed Avenue Road, and there on the curb was a guy panhandling. And he held out his cup, and he had a great line. He said, have you got any money? He said, I'm running for mayor. So that got my attention. I mean, terrific. So that guy had a story, right? Yeah. So I flipped him a quarter or something, I don't remember, and I paused and I said, tell me your story, Wow. And he began chatting with me a little bit, and then he looked up at me and he said, oh my God, you're Frank O'Day. He said, I've read your book.
Wow. Fantastic.
What a juxtaposition, right? From the Four Seasons Hotel to this guy. Yeah. And I said to him, why don't you go to AA? Why don't you sort of give it a shot again? He said, I've tried. And he said, and that's why I wrote the book, so people would get some hope. And I'm about two things, really, in my life. I'm about hope, and I'm about being a Canadian. And I think that we have the best country in the world, and if it weren't for this country, I probably never would have had the opportunities that I had to come from Skid Row, to actually build a couple of businesses, and to have a family, and my kids, and all of that as a result of just being really, really lucky and being born in this country. Mm-hmm. I was in Tanzania recently, and I could just as easily have been born there, but by an accident of birth, I was here. Yeah. And Tanzania, have I got time for a quick story about Tanzania?
We actually have a caller on the line. Frederick, are you there?
Because I could go on, right?
Did you have a question for our guest?
Yes, I do, actually. My story, I am starting to be a public speaker. My story has some content that can be graphic, but my concern is to protect the people in my life that maybe have caused the issues in my life without being able to stop my story from being told. How should I go about that?
Sorry, so people are stopping you from telling the story?
No, there's people in my life that are still in my life that I don't want to hurt by bringing things out in my story that might hurt them. But I think it'd be important to speak about it.
And now is the right time to speak about it?
Not sure. I'm trying to figure that out.
Yeah, there may be a delay that you might want to wait for some time to go by. Or you might want to change the names to protect the innocent. You might even want to change the identity of the lead character, which would be you.
Okay, that's an interesting thing. So make it like a third-party story.
Right.
I think what you really need to do is a quiet conversation offline with Terry, so that you can explain the circumstance. It's pretty hard for us to guess from here what it is. But I was in that difficulty. I mean, there were people in my life that are now in this book, and yet I had to be careful about that. But the really surprising thing is the people that are in the book became friends. We reconnected. It worked for me, but I had a very, very helpful writer who helped me write the book, who was able. But so I'm suggesting that he talked to you, Terry, and I think you could probably give him some pretty good guidance on that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for calling in, Frederick. We only have a couple minutes before the end of our time together. The show has really flown by, and I wanted to give each of you a chance to give some parting thoughts to our audience.
Frank.
As I was beginning to say, I'm all about being grateful for being in this country and the opportunities this country has provided all of us. And so if I can contribute to making this place a little better, I think that we all have a common mission. All of us, your audience, ourselves here, and that is to leave this life knowing that we left the place a little better for us having been here. We want to make a difference in other people's lives, at least I do. We want to know that our life and our journey made a difference. And I sort of focus all of my energy and things that I do around that. It's our obligation to leave Canada a better place than we found it.
Absolutely. And where can we find your book?
Oh, chapters. When All You Have Is Hope, Frank O'Day. Without oversaying, it's a great book. It's just a story of difficulty of start, perhaps. That's your START.
Right, yeah.
It's really about the situation, the challenge, the trouble, whatever it is.
But result.
Yeah. And my 3 words fit very well with that: hope, vision, action.
Yes.
That's what my life's about. So Terry, thank you for all you do too.
Oh well, thank you very much.
Where can we find you, Terry?
I'm at ubiquity.coach.
Okay.
So www.ubiquity.coach.
We have a few seconds left. Any parting tips for our viewers?
Yeah, I think to build a little bit on what Frank said, I think one way that we can give to other people is through the stories that we tell. And I think that when you're presenting in public, when you're presenting to a group of people, using that STAR storytelling method really helps. And the main reason is that when you use storytelling, you connect to emotions, and that really engages people.
I think we're at the end of our show tonight, but I wanted to thank you.
We had lots more to say.
We could have been here for another hour. I wanted to thank you, gentlemen, both so much for coming in. Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for watching us tonight. We will see you in the studio next week. Have a great night.